The sacred is revealed in the ordinary. There is a beauty in this. But how do we discover the mystery of the sacred in our seemingly mundane existence? Welcome to Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Let's join our hosts, Katie McAllister and Tony Pickler, as they explore the lives of people, organizations, and resources that will help us delve into the sacredness of the ordinary.
Welcome to Revealed, where we are looking into where the sacred meets the ordinary. Today we have an organization that we're going to be spotlighting, and we are so excited to have two guests in our studio. So Tony, why don't you introduce our guests and what organization they are from?
Thanks, Katie. So today we are looking at and examining We All Rise African American Resource Center here in Green Bay. We have in studio Robin Scott, who's the founder and executive director of We All Rise, and one of her colleagues, Rachel Westenberg, who's the Strategic Communications and Marketing Director, which sounds like a real mouthful. So welcome to Revealed.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thank you.
So when did We All Rise begin, and kind of what was the impetus that got it started?
So We All Rise started in 2016, honestly. Before it became We All Rise, it was Black Youth Alliance, and before that, it was a community's response to the 2016 murder of Philando Castile that happened in Minnesota. And there were a lot of community members that were mourning, and they were looking to, what could they do that was actionable to go through those stages with others in community? And so there was myself as a person that also was feeling the same sentiment, and others that gathered to celebrate his life, but then also to work through the different things that were coming up for us as a culture and community. And then from there, it just naturally began to become like activism work. Like, how do we bring about the attention of Black lives in our community and what is actually happening? And so I was working in the school district, I was working with young people, and had the opportunity to be with so many like beautiful families and be a part of really solution-based like mechanism within the schools to be able to support our families. But I learned, some really alarming statistics about the state of our young people and the African American community here in Green Bay. And so many of them were not enrolled in after school programs. Many of them were really struggling with their social connection and belonging. And from that stirred Black Youth Alliance. That was my way of, as a member of this community, to really push back and get our young people that are the future of our community involved and deepening their social connection and belonging here. And so what can we do to help? And I think that started the conversation of what does it really look like to support Black youth? It looks like supporting their families, and it spurred into the African American Resource Center. And so what We All Rise does is we create a space, a safe haven for Black folks in our community and all those that are most vulnerable within their communities, right? Because anti-Blackness is global. So no matter what community you exist in, what cultural background you come from, the more that you have the African phenotype, the darker your skin color within your community, the more curlier your hair, the more likely you are to experience anti-Blackness. And so we make space for those folks to come in, to receive services by professionals that either look like them or has done a heck of a lot of work training to be the most culturally competent and are committed on their journeys of aspiring allies, that they're always working towards that people can come in and they can feel safe to then access what we have on the ground. And then from there, we help them to navigate all the resources in our community. And they can have pride in that, right?
What would you describe as the status of Black?
Yeah, so in order for us to reconcile, we have to first be honest about, what we're faced with here in Wisconsin. And that is, we have the lowest academic achievement scores in the country for Black youth. And then also we have the highest number of incarcerated Black males in the country. And so I would say Wisconsin is named the worst place in America for Black people to live.
Really?
Although I know that there's conflicting studies that talked about, Green Bay being the best place for folks to live in America. So I struggle with that because I wonder if I know that it does not reflect the realities of my community and my culture. And so that is just a glimpse at what we're up against when we talk about like supporting those that are most vulnerable. But then there's additional studies, and we can talk all day about that talks about the well-being of those that are then African American, female survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and all of those things. Our community is strong. It's always pushed and to find ways to show up and to exist and to thrive and to, make good lives for our children and all of those things. And so, as a community, we continue to be strong. We continue to be resilient. We continue to, build on that strength in the ways in which we can. But then also the state we're at a point where we're being a lot more open and voiceful, and using the knowledge and the opportunity to bring our truths forward so that we can have a better state, better state for folks here.
We'll probably come back to some of the issues that the Black community is facing, but I'm curious about the role you play in the We All Rise organization. Maybe starting with you, Rachel. What's your role? What do you do day to day?
Yeah, so I'm the strategic communications and marketing director, and then financial officer for the agency. So
do you fit that all on a business card?
Yeah, it's actually 2 lines on my email signature. So I think I do a lot. I do whatever Robin tells me to do. Day to day, it's really about internal and external communications, right? We have a staff now of 18 full-time, part-time staff members. We're actively serving anywhere. Last quarter, I think it was 622 clients. And then we've just expanded into residential services, right? So we have multiple parts of our work between domestic violence services, sexual assault services, victim services, mental health services, youth services, and now residential services that all have to communicate with each other, right? And then external communication deals with a lot of like, what messaging are we putting out to community, right? How are we communicating with folks in community? Doing things like this. And then financial officer day to day looks like reviewing receipts and making expense reports and making sure that our agency financially is sound and running in the best way possible. And in between that, I think it's like grant writing, it's building programming, right? Fine tuning what we're already doing in the best way possible. Facilitating groups. I do a lot of work with aspiring anti-racist white allies in community to really dig into that conversation of, making space for, I always think of, this tension between this article coming out saying Green Bay is one of the best places to live in the country. And then the reality that a lot of our Black and brown neighbors face day to day. I always think of truth. 2 things can be true at once, right? And one of the really hard things that I've learned, especially through like being raised in the Catholic Church, right, is that things like dignity and worth of human beings and solidarity, like all of those things have to start with making truth that other people may have different experiences and realities, right? But the power in that is making space for actually believing folks.
Robin, I would think that your role as executive director is to oversee the entire operation, but also serve as the face of the organization. Would that be true?
Absolutely. In addition, I, in this work, decided to go back to get my master's degree in clinical mental health, knowing that, the realities that our communities face really does involve multiple different ways of healing. And so, I believe in people having access to various ways to support themselves and to move their journeys forward. And so by going back to get my master's degree, I'm able to now be a Black woman in our community that is able to provide those services in a culture of folks that representation really does matter. And then also lived experience really does play a part in that as well. And understanding then and breaking some of those things, the curses that we've experienced in our communities.
What's the African American population in, let's say, Green Bay and then in Brown County in general?
There's so many folks in our community that are living with others and transient and moving through, and they just weren't counted in those numbers. And so at our agency, our focus population is the African American community. We serve over 2,000 clients currently. And then we know that our schools, Green Bay area public schools have, actual schools that are majority like black and brown kids right now. And those numbers and the projection of those numbers are, high. So I don't know the exact stats.
So recently I co-authored a children's book called There's No Place Like Home, Billy Ball Meets a Friend. And one of the characters is this child of color who's homeless. So I'm just curious about, in the homeless population here in Green Bay, we do these point-in-time counts daily, but also monthly, and then twice a year. But do you think, is there a disproportionate number of people of color in those numbers?
So I'm going to answer your question with a yes and no, because truthfully, I haven't seen those numbers. So I apologize because we're in the middle of a grant writing, so that's just not the data sets I'm looking at right now. But I think of when we look at those we serve, right? Last quarter, which was April, May, and June of this year, we served 622 individuals. 304 of those identified as homeless. So I think that one of the tensions that we oftentimes even talk about in like grant applications or grant reporting is that point in time counts are great for folks who are actively on the street, right? But that's only one component of unhoused people in our community. We find that a lot of survivors, oftentimes, if they're fleeing and coming to the area, or they're just relocating here, oftentimes we'll be settling in with friends and family, right? We have clients who are actively living in basements, in garages, trying to figure out, like, now that I'm here, how do I establish and be part of community? I think that when we think about like the systems, and a lot of this kind of background from my understanding comes from my organizing days, right? With working on issues of mental health, housing, transportation, mass incarceration, and environmental justice. One of the core reasons of why I was drawn to wanting to work with Robin was because through all of those issues and through looking at all of those data sets nationally and statewide, there were always racial disparities included in that, right? That like we have a huge state of emergency with our mass incarceration system. And then to couple that with being Black, your rates are a lot higher to be charged at a lot greater rates than your white counterparts, or incarcerated a lot longer, right? Same thing with even when we talk about domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, right? When they're homeless, their rates of being assaulted or attacked on the streets are a lot higher than their white counterparts, right? So I can't speak specifically to that data set, but my understanding and my knowledge of the issues as I know them to be would say, yeah, probably.
So what would you say are some of those misconceptions out there that you want to put to rest?
I think that there's a lot of misconceptions that have been sensationalized about like media and rioting and protesting and like all of those things. Like we use a lot of buzzwords, and then we are really conditioned as a society to go with what the norm is, right? And that's what's kept us in so many ways from serving those that are most vulnerable, right? And so when I think about like COVID, and I think about the murder of George Floyd, where his neck was kneeled on for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think about how many times I've watched that happen in my community and nobody said or did, anything, right? And I think about Rodney King and all the other things that were right there front and center that, there wasn't such a national outcry to. I think that the pandemic itself created some almost, and I don't want to say perfect conditions because so many lives were lost, and so much fear and so much mental health, being exasperated from the effects of the pandemic. And we don't even really know the effects yet, right? But I would say that during that time, as human beings, we all were afraid of a virus that could sneak up on us, take our family members. There were so many unknowns. There was so much fear. And then also it created the condition that we weren't all just going. It wasn't our robotic every single day. For the first time, we were right there, front and center, and able to see the atrocities that have happened or are happening to our community and feel it in a way that we hadn't felt before. Because us too, as people, individually, had the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, the fear that is so it permeates through my community every single day we leave the house. And if you're a Black mother like I am, every time my son leaves the house, and when I hear him with, wherever I am, go from, before he was baby Dennis, right? And then now that he's only 10 years old and he's getting a little bit bigger, he's now being called Dennis by people that, I thought really, really cared and loved him, right? And that shift alone, it scares me. It scares me for many different reasons, because I know that once my boy becomes even a little bit a bigger boy, that the risk that he runs when he leaves the house to go on the playground could result in him being murdered. With Tamir Rice within 12 seconds of being on the playground with a toy gun.
As a white woman who was born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin, there's 1,000 ways that we can look at issues, right? I think the biggest thing that I want to stress to folks is to be able to begin the process of identifying microaggressions, how you perpetuate those in society, how you have racist behaviors, right? All of those kinds of things. You can either look at it as a condemning, right? It's bad, I'm bad, all of those kinds of things. You can also claim the space that I was raised in a society that has put so much into me that I now get to decide what I want to operate and go out with in community, right? And just I look for male allies when it comes to issues of sexism, right? And sexual discrimination and all of those kinds of things. When we look at racism, it's white people's issue to solve, right? The behaviors, the systems, all of it. And when those things feel really big, we have to start by how am I actively a part of those things, right? And that starts with what are the misconceptions, right? And that starts with being courageous enough to ask questions of I could either look at academic statistics and say, I think people of color are they're not as smart, right? I could also ask questions of why are folks measuring so low, right? What is going on? Because that then can bring in truth. It can bring in all of the components that play into somebody's lives, right? And can make space for solidarity and dignity and human worth and all of those kinds of things that are foundational to who we are as people. But I think that the work is ours to do, right? We have to begin to identify those things so that way we can start making those shifts and making those educational jumps and sharing those things with our friends, right? And I think that's the biggest thing I try to encourage aspiring anti-racist white allies is that claim that space that you're imperfect, right? And especially from a faith standpoint, right? God knows every hair on our head, right? That includes the good and the bad. I think when you live in a community, and I come across a lot of people in Green Bay who experience this, that there's this Green Bay pride, right? You're born and raised in this community, this mentality of we're a small community with a big community mentality. It can be really hard to recognize that not everybody gets that reality in our community. It can be very painful. It can be really hard, but that's about us. Right? And it doesn't make anybody else's truth less valid. So the work is mine to do. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about all of the isms, we like to say it's other people's problem, right? The work is mine to do.
So how would somebody support you? Like, what are the things that listeners and the greater community can do to support We All Rise?
So Rachel has been genius in the ways that she's gotten the message out to folks about what our needs are. And so there's a multitude of ways that you can support, right? I like to start now, and I've started differently over time, but knowledge. Rachel just talked about that before, the responsibility to end some of the things that have happened that have historically permeated within our communities in the Americas with African Americans and whites and all those things. Our allies, the knowledge that you gain, share it with other people. The push to not sit at the dinner table and not try to have tough conversations. We have to live tough lives because those conversations are not being had. And at every single level, right? The individual level, the community level, and the society level. We need people, everyday folks, to be willing to that are at the table, that have their seat at the table, be willing to spread that knowledge, what they've learned, what they've witnessed, what they've experienced. And then there's other ways to help us. Volunteering at our organization. We have had, I would say, majority churches and church young people that have come and they keep it cleaned up. They keep it organized in a way that allows us to be able to get to the people that are most in need. And then obviously there's other ways to donate directly to our organization, knowing that when we have gotten unrestricted funds as an organization, there's been a fear of we need to get all the resources that we can. So you get a larger donation during the national uprising. We bought a van, because how are we going to get our people around? And then we, took money and built a job center with 6 computers to be able to service our clients. So a lot of the influx from some of the larger things that we've been a part of, we really it's not just moving in fear, it's moving in the spirit, but it is a lot of fear around it. People may not be paying attention in 5 years to what's happening to Black folks. So we've taken those dollars and we've tried to build up good offices for our staff, and then also the resources that we needed on the ground to be able to serve people whether we have money or not, right? And that's, we can get donations, but we needed the closet, and we needed the computers, and we need to be able to pay the Wi-Fi. And so, yes, donations go a long way, but it's all those things.
So how do you see the holy or the sacred revealed in the work that you do at We All Rise?
I listen to folks in my community say every day, I've never felt or seen anything like this to help us. When they say that, and I think about when we were just sitting in the room and building, we never knew what it was going to be. We could have never imagined this, planned it or anything. God just did it and made it happen. And every time they say that, I feel it. I feel it all through me.
Last week, I walked into All Seasons, and there were a group of 3 guys who were in one of the community spaces helping one of the guys study for his pre-GED test to see where he would be placed. And there was so much encouragement and laughter, but also vulnerability, right? Of he was sharing that he feels insecure about having to even do this and embarrassed that people are helping him. But it was just met with so much love of wouldn't you rather help? Wouldn't you rather us help you? And just them being present with that. The other way I think is just we see that every day when our door opens. We get to meet some of the most beautifully complex people. And I think
people too.
Yes. I think, and I'm okay, this may have to be edited because I don't want to break HIPAA. But we have a client who we've served for years who is in the middle of a really tough mental, how do you say that?
Health state.
Yeah. And they walked up to me last week and just looked at me. And they're at a point right now where you don't know what's reality and what's not when they speak to you, right? Mm-hmm. But they just looked at me and took my hands and took a deep breath and they said, I think you need this. And then they started rummaging around in their bag, and they pulled out this kid's book that I still have in my car. And it says, Don't You Know God Loves You? And it was a little kid's book. And they handed it to me and said, I think you need this today. And then just walked away. And I proceeded to go into Robin's office and cry because I was like, how can you not believe when stuff like that happens multiple times a day where you work? I don't know anything other holier or sacred than that.
Like, I remember a time as a little kid that when we were going through a lot of struggles, and I remember always praying to God, like, once I known God, I remember always saying, like, why? Like, why am I feeling this? Why is my family going through this? And, like, last night I was in the hospital with my little brother, and he's struggling a little bit, needing some support. And I'm thinking back to, like, our agency right now. And I think about all the times that I asked God for help, and I asked him, why? Why am I going through this? And I think about, fast forward to the way that we see service now, and the way that we all rise as giving service and trying to give service, because we're not perfect by any means. We make mistakes all the time. But that's why I went through all those things was for me to be able to face my culture and my community, and to be able to say that, you know, like, even if we don't get it right, I'll apologize, and we're still going to move forward together. The Holy Spirit moves because we're breaking generational curses that people thought was, like, you know, going to be with us forever, and they're just not. You know, like, what's living inside of us, we're sharing with other people, and then we're not giving up. We're not letting them, like, you know, be by themselves in it. So that's why. That's a real strong question.
And it was also more than one or two sentences,
Yeah,
but I'm not sorry.
So, ladies, thank you for coming, for spending this R&R time, Robin and Rachel time with us. We cannot thank you enough for the work that you guys are doing for this community, for this world, and we just really support everything that you guys do, and just keep the spirit going. Keep letting the spirit lead you, and it's great stuff, man. So
We've been blessed by your presence, by your work. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us.
This has been Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin.